let's talk about decoupled Drupal and how to build the stable solution using Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 and JSON API, ReactJS, and Elasticsearch as a basis for a decoupled site. So in this speech, let's talk about, firstly, let's talk about what is actually decoupled Drupal. So in few words, the decoupling of Drupal is a process of employing Drupal as a web service provider that exposes data for other applications. It could be one application or multiple application at user end. So as in other words, we can talk about Drupal as a web service. So as we can see on this diagram, we can see that this is a diagram of the typically decoupled application. So at backend side, we can have a Drupal, which using REST API for exchange data. And at the consumer application, we can have HTTP client, which also using for exchange the data. And this HTTP client using HTTP request to the REST API, and after data processing by Drupal, it sends responses to the consumer application for displaying all the processed data to the end user. This is, in simple words, how the decoupled Drupal works. But let's see it in more details. Let's check what is actually decoupled architecture and why and when we need to use it. First of all, it's decoupled content management. So with decoupled system, we can use Drupal for content management, and we can display the result of this data for different applications, for multiple sites especially, and for mobile applications, etc. And in this case, we can say about conception of Drupal site and Drupal repository. So Drupal site, when we can talk about Drupal site, if Drupal is using for displaying of some content, but when Drupal is using as only data backend, in terms of decoupling, we should say as Drupal repository. This is two differences, and we will talk about that a little later when we will talk about the types of Drupal decoupling. Also, if we are saying decoupled Drupal, we also can tell about the microservices architecture, because when we're doing decoupling, we can divide separate components as microservices, and we can use microservices management technology for management of this stuff. And also, for decoupled architecture, we can talk about the backend as service also, and the content as service. So Drupal with a decoupled project providing content as service for front-end applications. And in this case, we also have service-to-service communication, and we have at other microservices technology stuff. And as I told a little earlier, with decoupled Drupal project, we can have one backend for different client services. So one Drupal backend can be a source for that data source for multiple client application or client services in this case. So let's, for more clear understanding of this stuff I mentioned, let's do some comparison of decoupled and monolithic Drupal applications. So as we can see on the left side of this diagram, we have monolithic Drupal applications. So in this case, with Drupal application or Drupal site, we have Drupal backend and also Drupal frontend, which generated data using Drupal template system and Drupal rendering system for providing results and displaying at the client application or client browser. It's monolithic application stuff. But on the right side, we can see the diagram of decoupled Drupal application. What do actually we have here? At the beginning, we have Drupal backend, which contains data. And this Drupal backend also provides some REST API interface for data exchange. As usual, it's using JSON data format for data exchange, but also XML could be used. This interface could be related to some middleware applications in different projects. It depends on the architecture of separate project, but for example, it could be Node.js server, and also could be some other middleware application. And at the front side, we have consumer application, which could be based on React or React Native if we have, for example, mobile application. It could be, for example, React Gatsby application. So it's some it's some application which using for converting data from Drupal backend provided by REST API interface. It's applying templates, its own templates, or using Drupal templates for conversion data into HTML and displaying to the end user. This is how decoupled application works here. And let's do some additional comparison. So decoupled versus monolithic. So monolithic Drupal is a single site that does not expose data to other application. It's uses its own architecture, as we can see there. But also we can talk about fully decoupled Drupal and pseudo decoupled Drupal. It's also divided into inside the decoupled architecture. So fully decoupled Drupal site is a site that exposes data to one or multiple applications for consumption or manipulations. And application could be server side or client side. Could be, as it depends on the architecture project. In this case, we have Drupal backend, which provides data to Drupal frontend for building layouts, for using some rules of the content renderable things and other stuff. And in result, it's using REST API interface for providing data and send them to the decoupled application and getting some responses from there. It's a fully decoupled Drupal. And also we can have pseudo decoupled Drupal. It's little more difficult. It's a fully decoupled site, which with exception that presentational information is exposed to application for consumption or manipulation. So we are not only doing data exchange, but we also doing exchange of the layout settings, of the display settings, and decoupled application is using them for the data output there. Both types of decoupling are using in different projects, and it depends on the project details and some things which actually project needed. But all of these two ways are used. And before we'll talk about some more details about how to build correct decoupled project in a correct way. Let's talk about some advantages and disadvantages of decoupling in Drupal projects. First of all, it's content syndication. This thing is, we can talk it in just few words. So we doing right one time, we creating content one time, but we can publish it everywhere as we need. So for example, we can create one node in Drupal and we can share this content across few sites or few applications as we need in architecture of our project. Second thing is separation of concerns. As we told about decoupling of Drupal is using all the services inside the project. We can separate the part of project in the structure and we can deal with them separately. And in this case, we have less issues in comparison to the monolithic Drupal project because we can deal with different components separately. Then let's talk about user-centered user experience. As you know, in Drupal, user experience is not the really most powerful thing. But when we are using decoupling system, we can do with user experience as we wish because we can provide any type of interfaces. We can use any technologies as we need, as we want. Because, for example, we can use React. We can use, for example, React Native for mobile application. We can use other stuff, and it's more flexible. It's more usable, and it allows us as developers to provide more and better user experience in result. Also, if we are using this stuff for front-end development, we are also increasing front-end developers' experience because we are using different libraries, we are using different frameworks for the front-end side, and we are not limited by the solutions and technologies for front-end, which are provided by Drupal for regular sites. I mean, for monolithic Drupal sites, because as you know, also this front-end part is not the most powerful thing in Drupal. And also, the last advantage I want to talk about, it's pipeline development. What actually I mean here? I mean that when we are doing decoupling of the project during the Drupal development, we can, and we are using separate services architecture, we can use multiple developers teams with different levels and different scope of technologies, and they could deal together. They can cooperate together with working on different part of project with the different part of sites, and they can deal with this part of sites in the same time because it's a most benefit of decoupled because it's doing the development process most flexible and most useful for developers, for engineers. And this is really cool when we are doing development by this way. But also, let's talk about not about only advantages. Decoupling has also some disadvantages, and let's describe them. In comparison to the monolithic Drupal site, decoupling architecture is most bigger. It contains a lot of services. It contains a lot of additional things, and it makes much more additional points of failure. So it requires additional testing, additional attentions from the lead developers for checking and comparing the results of development to the documentation for providing most correct solutions for prevention of possible failure. The second thing that when we are doing decoupling, we could have some troubles with security and input sanitization because, as I told earlier, the front-end part is based on the third-party applications like React application, and in this case, we should deal with some sanitization and some security things for prevention of possible injection to site and some other security stuff. So it requires a very big attention during development for prevention of not defense situations when a site could be hacked or probably something could be injected. Next disadvantage, it depends on Drupal, default Drupal architecture, because in Drupal, when you have a regular site which based on the as usual, usual Drupal site, it's based on layout and displays for management. And when we are using decoupled solutions, sometimes it's really hard to implement all technical things related to layout and display settings, because sometimes it's hard to implement all things which are provided by layout and display management. For example, when we are using penalizers and other stuff, it could provide a lot of different layout and display things, which could be hard to be implemented in the decoupled system. And I think probably the one of the most disadvantages of the decoupling is previewable content workflows. When we are doing content management process in a regular Drupal site, I mean without decoupling, the content preview is fairly simple, because content manager can just unpublish the node or block and can just view it as authorized user, but with permissions for viewing unpublished content. With decoupling, it's much more difficult, because by default, when you are using decoupling with, for example, JSON API, all endpoints will provide results only for publishing content. Anyway, with some custom coding and some custom tuning and providing some custom endpoints, we can fix this issue with using spatial access rules, with using spatial tokens for access to the unpublished content, and issue could be solved. But anyway, it requires additional development, and it's not simple, and it's not working out of the box with any type of modules for providing the REST or JSON API or other types of interfaces for data exchange. All of them are working with published content only there. Other stuff is system notifications. In Drupal, it's implemented by default. It's not by the best way. the same situation we have with decoupling. So with system notifications, we also need to provide some custom solutions for displaying notifications to the end users. Also, some kind of disadvantage could be monolithic performance benefits. I mean, Drupal performance things related to the caching, to the cache tags and other stuff, because when we are implementing the displaying of content using third-party application, or probably using some React side or other stuff things, we can have some issues dependent on the caching. I will talk about them a little later, but this part of things is a kind of disadvantageous. And as I told little earlier, one of the most disadvantages, it's accessibility and user experience, which is provided by Drupal by default. I think it's clear for all of us that Drupal does not provide the very good user experience, but if it's fine for regular sites, it's really not fine for decoupled one. So here we go. Let's talk about Drupal web services ecosystem. For Drupal, we have some kind of web services. We can some kind of APIs which could provide as services for data exchange. It's core REST, it's core JSON API. As you know, JSON API was a separate module before Drupal 8.8 version. Now it's in Drupal core, in Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 also. Also, relaxed web services module could be used. It's also based on the REST API. And as alternative, we can use GraphQL as non-REST API service, but it's also frequently used for building decoupled applications based on Drupal. And let's talk about some more things in scope of these separate things related to these APIs. Let's talk about JSON API because it's, I think, one of the most powerful things for building decoupled Drupal applications. As I told earlier, it was a separate module before the Drupal 8.8. Now it's a part of Drupal core. This module is based on RESTful technology, and it's using serialization for module for building data. And as we can see from its title, it's using JSON API specification still of HAL. I mean, the technology which was used in core REST, it's hypertext application language. It's not using this model, but it's using its own technology called JSON API specification. And I think the most benefit of this API, it's a fact that it's entity-based solution. What I actually mean? I mean that when we are using JSON API, we have specific endpoints by default from out of the box for each type of entity provided by Drupal. For example, for nodes, for blocks, for users, for taxonomy, paragraph, etc. So each entity which available in the system will have separate JSON API endpoint, and it could be queried without additional coding, without additional operations at backend side. So I think it's the most powerful benefit of JSON API, that it's a fully entity-based solution. At this screen, we can see an example of the JSON API output. It's an example of the output for the node of the page. As we can see, it's a standard JSON output. And as you can see, it contains default attributes of node, for example, node ID, version ID, len codes, timestamps, and other stuff, including all fields. When we are talking about JSON API, I think from one side, it's a big benefit that we are getting all necessary data. I mean, all possible fields, all values, etc. for node, but in some cases, it could not be a benefit because sometimes we could have to use only some separate part of the node data, but by default, JSON API returns all values from node value. In our case, I think also for the development process, it could not be a problem, because for JSON API we also can use the specific methods for filtering, for building queries, and for providing the necessary data by the request to the specific endpoints. But in this case, when we are using specific queries to the JSON API, we should do it carefully, because in this case we actually should know what we are actually querying, because we can have slow queries, we can have big queries which can provide the performance impacts. I will talk about that a little later when we will talk about performance. But let's go ahead. Alternative solution to the JSON API is GraphQL. It's an alternative module. It's already used at the lot of projects. And the main thing that it's alternative to the REST. It's based on the declarative queries. And the main interesting thing that GraphQL, it's not using a lot of different endpoints, but it could use single or multiple URLs, and all necessary information could be queried using this simple endpoint. And one more thing that related to the GraphQL, that we can specify only needed information, and we can get an exactly that in comparison to the JSON API. For example, if we will switch to the screen, we will see that this default output returns a lot of information which could be not needed for some purposes. But for GraphQL, we can set up what we actually need in the output, and we can query only necessary parts for the this query in comparison to JSON API. And one more benefit, that we can use direct integration with Twig. We have specific model for that, and in this case, the results of GraphQL queries could be processed by Twig directly and returned to the application in this with this processed stuff. And in conclusion, let's do some comparison for some cases for JSON API GraphQL as the two most used solutions. First, it's comparison for updates and support. For JSON API, it's a part of Drupal core, and updates and support should be fairly simple because when we update in Drupal core, we also update in JSON API. GraphQL, it's contrib module. It's require additional attention for updates and support because it potentially could have some issues with versions, and when we are doing updates, we should read and check release notes and check the compatibility with Drupal core and other contrib modules. Next, for endpoints architecture, for JSON API, we have multiple endpoints, and sometimes it could be difficult, especially for developers, because it requires a lot of documentation for describing all of them. For GraphQL, it's a little more simple because we will have single endpoint or few endpoints which could be used, and we can create documentation in one place and describe only this one endpoint. For data access, as I told earlier, JSON API is fully entity-based, and each type of entity will be available as separated endpoint, and all fields data also will be available. For GraphQL, the base schema for accessing data is available, so we will also have access to the nodes, to the node fields, and other stuff. But if we will need some implementation for custom things or custom entities, we should provide custom schemas and doing some operations at the backend side. It's not required at the JSON API. It's really more flexible. Next is of installation and configuration. For JSON API, it's very simple. It's when we enable the module, it's doing basic configuration by itself, and we will see only list of the endpoints for use, and all of these endpoints are already available for reading operations, also for writing operations. And for more detailed tuning, we can use JSON API extras module. It provides us some user interface for additional settings. And for difficult things, we also can deal with custom code for providing some things related to JSON API. For GraphQL, it's a little more complex to use because it requires more operations with permissions, with configuration, and with custom code, especially related to the data schemas. Next, let's compare the queries. For JSON API, the query process, it's easy to implement because it's fully documented. It's entity-based, so we can just check the structure of entities in Drupal, and using exactly the same field names, field structure, and other stuff. So it's also benefit of queries in JSON API. And at the same time, we could have some issues related to revision of paragraphs. Especially, it requires some patches for JSON API module and for paragraph. And other thing, I think it's benefit that user can create their own queries without changes at the server side. I mean, JSON API contains its own processor for queries, and we can query the entity fields, values, and properties as we wish, and it not requires any additional coding. At the same time, for GraphQL, it's sometimes it depends on implementation of data schemas. It could require additional setup. and do some configuring and programming, and it's more difficult, and it requires more higher experience of the developer in comparison to the JSON API. It's more difficult anyway. For writing operations, JSON API has out of the box solution for writing operation, and it's really easy to implement. For GraphQL, at the same time, it sometimes could be tricky to design and to implement, and as I told, it requires more efforts from developers for implementation. And for data output, it's for JSON API, the data output is entity-based, so we will have exactly the same structure as we have in Drupal by default, but we can tune up it using filters. We can do some sorting in the query, and also we can remove extra data which should be not unnecessary for specific queries. At the same at GraphQL, its data output, it's the more flexible to output in comparison to JSON API. But as I told, it requires strong understanding for built queries for prevention of the performance impacts, because if you are doing some non-optimized queries, it can provide high loading and especially performance impacts on the project. And if it happens on live site, it could be a really big problem for fast resolving. So we did some comparison, and let's move forward. Now, let's switch to the ReactJS. As I told earlier, ReactJS is a JavaScript library which could be provided for building front-end application for data exchange with Drupal with third-party application like Node.js server. And as usual, especially in my experience, these three type of the libraries and frameworks could be used. It's React for desktop applications, it's React Native for mobile applications, and the more new thing that call it Gatsby framework. It's really useful thing. I think it's really interesting how to use these libraries, and I think it required to have separate talk about using React as source for building application at the front-end side. But in scope of current talk, let's move on and let's focus on the other part of application. A few words about search system in decoupled Drupal platforms. As you know, the search system provided by Drupal in core, it's not the best, and as we can say, funny, the first thing we should do when we're doing Drupal install, we should disable the search provided by core, and it's true. So we have some alternatives for search systems. It's first of all, it's Elasticsearch. Also, it's Apache Solr. Also, one more old platform could be used. It's called Sphinx, but it used it for Drupal 7, as I know. For modern solutions, Elasticsearch and Apache Solr could be used. Especially Elasticsearch is more flexible and more useful for building decoupled solutions. I want to mention that if we are trying to use Elasticsearch, we should use Elasticsearch 7.x platform, because 6th version of Elasticsearch has end of life next month and should not be used anymore. From Drupal side, we should use the module called Elasticsearch connector. It allows a fairly simple setup, just few fields should be filled up, I mean connection settings, and Elasticsearch will be connected to the search API. And the most benefits thing that Elasticsearch could be very good integrated with the search API and facets, and it's the most powerful thing of this platform. Also, Elasticsearch and Search API provides an abilities to use some custom coding for indexing and querying, for example, for providing computed fields, combined fields, and building some difficult facets and other stuff. And results of the search could be used by decoupled application, and it could be used as it depends on the project details. So, for example, it could contain search by using different languages with filtering by languages for multilingual sites. It could use search by part of words and word combination using stemming and other stuff. So it's a really useful thing for building decoupled websites. So let's go. So we talked about more general things, but let's talk about some things related to building successful and stable application at the decoupled platform. So let's talk about performance tuning and about the building stable sites from performance point of view. First of all, it's the first thing. It's environmental settings tuning. So first of all, we should be attention. It should be attention that we need to provide enough memory for Drupal, because as you know, for example, if we are building solution using JSON API, it's using queries to entities, and when these queries are not being cached, it can use a lot of memory, especially from Drupal level at other stuff. So first thing that we need to provide enough memory for our application. Next thing that we could provide correct setup for load balancer if we are using virtualization at the project. For example, if we are using some cloud computing stuff or the stuff or all other things, the load balancer should be configured in proper way for proper scaling of the application. Next thing, that correct setup for cache. When we are using JSON API queries, the first thing that should be implemented is caching, because for example, if we are doing queries for a lot of fields, it making a lot of query operation to the database, and it could provide a lot of the loading and some bottleneck for processing of the queries at the SQL side, or also at the PHP side when we are processing the responses from SQL. So the correct setup of the cache is the most necessary thing for building the decoupled solution. Also, at the same time, we should use optimal JSON API queries, because by default, if you will check the response of JSON API, as we saw at the screenshot, you will see that JSON API returns a lot of unnecessary data, which could be unnecessary for specific display or for specific application. And with more optimal queries, we can decrease the size of the data object. We could remove unnecessary values from there, And also these values will be not queried, and it will provide more low loading at the side or at the backend side. Next thing is optimization for images. By default, if we are talking about JSON API, it cannot do and it cannot work with the image styles. For providing the ability to use image styles, we need to use two models. First is consumers model, and second is consumer image styles. At the same time, for more optimal using of image optimization, we also need to use some custom coding for providing only necessary image styles in the response, because consumer image styles allows to set up the possible image styles only for specific consumer, but not for specific display mode or other things. So when we are querying the entity, not necessary image styles will be created. It's not a good thing, but it could be solved by custom code. And and for the live sites, one more thing, it's a tuning for execution of cron operations, because for example, when we have some integration with other services and with all other type of the heavy loading, probably, we should be carefully with regular operations like cron, and we should set up them carefully for prevention of possible loading. For example, if we have some data exchange operations or some integration with other services, we should schedule the data exchange operation to the time when site has the low loading, for example, at the night time. This is the good practice for live sites. Let's go on. Caching for high load decoupled websites. As I told already, caching is really necessary for decoupled websites, because any type of decoupled website doing a lot of queries to the database, to the data storages, and anyway, it provides some loading. And in situations when we have a lot of active users at the site, this kind of loading could provide performance impacts, and sometimes it could be a kind of DDoS attack, and the system could be not accessible to the users if caching is not configured properly. So what is the way for solving this issue? First of all, it's correct setup of the cache in Drupal. It's very simple. It's cache tags, it's cache context. It could be set up per entities. Because if you are using JSON API, we are using entity system, and all of this stuff is working. Second, it's using of memcache, because memory cache storages are more faster than database storages, and memcache will provide us the fastest storage. One more thing is reverse proxy cache, which could be used if the most part of our users are anonymous. When we have authorized users, it's not too useful, but when most part of users are anonymous, the reverse proxy cache could be a really good solutions, because already cached values will be returned by proxy cache without interrupting and without running any backend operations. And our backend infrastructure will be ready and will have resources for doing with some other things. And also for JSON API, we have separate kind of caching. It's cache warming. So we have separate module for that. So if you are using standard queries to the JSON API endpoints, we can warm the caches for them, and before using by real users, these users could use these kind of cached values there. Next, few words about troubleshooting and use cases. First thing, it's slow JSON API queries. First of all, when we are doing queries and building queries from React side, for example, to the JSON API, we should do some optimization, and we should use only optimized queries for decreasing of possible operations. Especially, it could be related to file operations, image operations, working with paragraphs, and with entities which contains a lot of fields, because this kind of operation could be really hard for processing. Next is high memory usage for non-cached JSON API queries. Solution for this is optimizing of queries and at the same time using of caching, because we cannot solve it without these two things. One more thing is short cache lifetime for responses in some cases. We can face with this issue in cases when the content of the site is is under active content management. So in this case, content will be updated regularly, and in this case, cache lifetime will be short. So in this type of situation, we should find the balance between the cache lifetime and displaying the latest content values. One more thing is troubles with cache warming. As I told a little earlier, when we are using JSON API boost and warmer module for caching of the JSON API responses, when we are using standard queries, everything is fine, and queries could be cached. But when we are using custom queries with custom filters and sorting, this kind of queries could not be warmed. It's not good, but this model is not providing this solution out of the box. In this case, we should provide our own solutions for warming. It requires custom coding. And as I told, it's troubles with image styles, but because consumer and consumer image styles module providing additional styles which are not necessary by default. So in this case, we should be really careful with building the correct solution, with building the stable decoupled website. But if you will follow all of these rules, the decoupled website will be stable. It will provide a lot of benefits. It will be flexible, and it will allow us to build multiple applications based on the same Drupal installation and the same Drupal background with the same content management system. And it should be really useful and simple to use in business stuff. And that's all. I'm ready to answer the 4 possible questions.
Thank you, Oleg. If anyone has any question, please feel free to unmute and ask.
Checking the chat.
Looks like there are no questions.
Mm-hmm.
No questions, no answers.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Oleg. It was very completely described, mostly completely I heard in my life.
Very detailed. Yes, thank you for that.
That's cool. If anyone will have some questions, you feel free to answer the questions at my email. And also we can meet at the Drupal org. It's linked to my Drupal profile. So feel free to ask questions here. And see you on the next DrupalCamp events.